Let me introduce myself. My name is Frank Finlay. I'm Professor of German and Executive Dean of the Faculty of Arts, Humanities and Cultures. And it is really an enormous pleasure, I have to say, to welcome you all most warmly to something which is a bit of a new type of format for us, the Leeds Alumni Voices. Welcome, some of you, I believe there's lots of alumni in the room. You might never have been in here before. I was asked by Jane earlier what this is used for. This is the Clothworkers Hall, the Clothworkers Centenary Hall, and it's used for musical performances. I was over with some colleagues in Hamburg at Steinway Factory to bring a fantastic new concert grand over. The Leeds International Piano Competition will feature here. But it's kind of interesting I mention it because the Clothworkers were kind of really important organisation, still are a very important organisation in the history of the University of Leeds. The University of Leeds traces its origins back to a medical school in the 1830s and then something called the Yorkshire Science College. And at that time, the college was mostly kind of focused on what were the most important industries of the day, which of course was the rich textile heritage of this region. Today, one of the most rapidly expanding industries in the UK, probably the greatest and yet unsung success story of UK, are the cultural industries. They're worth something like 96 billion to the country, and it's something that we excel in. We're known to excel in right around the world. And so it's perhaps very fitting that we have as our guest this evening, Jane Featherstone, who, if you look at her credits, is someone who has been associated either as a creative director or as an executive producer with some of the landmark TV productions of the last 10, 15 years and more. Some of my favourites, as we were talking, are my family's favourites, whether it's Hustle, Spooks, Broadchurch, Life on Mars, which was kind of quite a groundbreaking series, as I recall. And it's great to have you here. Jane's going to be in conversation with my colleague, Bethany Klein, who is Professor of Media and Communication. And Bethany's specialism looks to cultural policy, popular culture, and also popular music, and the great sellout of popular music. Bethany's working on the book at that moment. And I'm just going to kind of sidetrack a little bit. Bethany has been head of School of Media and Communication. We've worked together only for the best part of 18 months, and I've taken it upon me to use every public occasion between now and Christmas when you stand down as head of school to thank you for your fantastic contributions. So, without further ado, sit back and enjoy. We've got kind of a 40-minute talk show format, and it'll be followed by questions and answers, and then Jane will be outside in the foyer area to meet people for some time after the talk. So welcome, and over to you.
So thank you, Frank, and thank you, Jane, for joining us. I'm channeling James Lipton inside the Actors Studio, which is probably a reference that is going to be lost in this crowd. I know, but you just have to trust that that is what's going on up here as I'm asking questions. We're going to spend about 40 minutes in conversation, as it were, and then leave some time at the end for questions from you. So I think that we'll start at the obvious place, which is maybe, Jane, you could just start by sharing a bit about your professional background with us, how you got into television, how your career developed since then.
So hello. The talk show thing is like, we're expecting Jerry Springer to walk in, aren't we? Or some sort of rampant ex-boyfriend of mine is going to appear and he's got my baby! No, that's not going to happen, it's going to be fine. So 1989, when did I leave here? 1991. In 1991, in the early of the year, I went to the careers section here, which was a computer then. I don't know if it's a person now, maybe it's more than one person, but then it was a computer. And it was the first computer I'd ever really seen, because we didn't really have computers in those days. Many of you are also of my generation, so you'll remember that. And I had to fill in this form that was sort of 40 questions long on this thing, you know, the green thing. Do you remember that cursor that moved, that kind of slow thing? And you'd be like typing like this. And I answered all these questions, which were presumably some sort of quiz to determine what job I'd be good at. And I waited, and then the thing came out of the machine at the end. You know those slow things with the perforated edges on the side? You're waiting for this. And so your career should be, and I was waiting to pull this thing out. And it said prison guard. So, this is completely true. I wish I'd kept the paper. So I was like, oh, God. So I really, and I said, I really thought I'd be quite good at something creative. And they said, well, it says prison guard. I was like, right. So there must have been a shortage for prison guards or something at the time. Anyhow, I left Leeds on the Friday afternoon, and by a sort of quirk of a friend of mine who'd left a year earlier, who was working in the Spurs press office, and she'd rung me about a week before I left Leeds and said, I know you want to work in sort of media and TV, but I've met Paul Gascoigne, the footballer's manager, and he's asked me if I want to be his PA for 3 months because his previous PA's just walked out. The alarm bell should have probably rung at that point. And I was like, oh. And I love football. I grew up in South London, and Crystal Palace was my team. And not doing so well now, if anyone knows, it was really bad. Anyway, that's a separate thing. And she said, would you want to come and be interviewed for the job? So on the Friday, we had a little leaving party on the Friday night. I got the train down, had to find a posh outfit to wear, went to meet Gaza and his manager. And then on the Monday, I started work for Paul Gascoigne, which was a kind of mad, crazy thing to do when I left Leeds. Lasted for 2 years, but during that time, there was a documentary being made about Paul. And I took every opportunity to tell the people who were making the documentary that I wanted to work in TV. And that, please, could I get a job, or could they let me? And eventually they introduced me to somebody, and I got a job as a runner with Dan Patterson at Hat-Trick, who make Have I Got News For You and Whose Line Is It Anyway and Trot the Dead Donkey and those things, because he was a Spurs fan. So he thought that I would dish the dirt on Gaza. That was literally the only reason I got the job, and I lied about being able to use a computer. And then I sort of made my way up from runner to line producer and then producer. And I got some big breaks along the way with some people like Tony Garnett, who made Kathy Come Home, and a brilliant producer who makes This Life and Cardiac Arrest many years ago, wonderful producer. And then Paul Abbott's first series, who is an amazing screenwriter. So I kind of worked my way up from making the tea to producing.
So a lot of the work that you're known for, you were in the role of executive producer, which I now assume is similar to being a prison guard. But
Clearly.
For those of us who have not worked in the industry, maybe you could tell us a bit more about what being an executive producer entails. What is that role?
Well, it's the question I get asked most when you meet people, and they say, what does a producer actually do? And clearly it's a mystery, which it probably still is to the people who work in the business, but a producer and an executive producer in television are slightly different from in film, and many of you will know this, so forgive me if I'm telling you things you already know, but just for those who don't. A producer and an executive producer is somebody who finds the project. So my job is to look for ideas and writers who I think have a story to tell. And I do that by going to loads of theatre, by watching lots of television, by meeting all the agents, reading lots of scripts. And I have a team who help me do that. And I will find a writer whose voice I like, and I'll think, God, they've got something to say, and I love their work. So I'll try and get a meeting with them, and we'll discuss what ideas they might have and what ideas we might have, and sometimes we have an idea for something. So Hustle was an idea that we had, and that we took to the writer. And then I commission a script from that person, which means I pay them to write the first episode of something, and then we'll go to a broadcaster. Sometimes you can go to a broadcaster first, but my job really is to find the idea, find the writer, and then sell the project and develop it, often over 2 or 3 years. It's quite slow, and do lots of drafts with the writer. It's a purely creative job for me. I don't do the production stuff anymore, which is making the thing, which is also great fun, but I love the scripting and casting side. And then we go and find a director, and then we put the cast together. So you're the person who's responsible to the buyer, the person who's buying the show from you, to deliver the show. And it's your name on the contract to deliver that show on time, on budget, and at creative high quality. And I do that job alongside running the companies, whether it's Kudos or my new company, Sister. But really, my love is to produce things. It's to take an idea and then see it on television.
So, as you've mentioned, you left Kudos in 2015.
I'm going to get a bit closer. I feel like we're too far away.
And
shuffle in a bit, yeah.
And founded your own production company, Sister Pictures. So, how did you decide to make the change, and what have been the sort of benefits and challenges of running Sister Pictures?
So, I'd been at Kudos for 15 years, I think, which is a long time, and I loved it. And there, I'd done things like Spooks and Hustle and Life on Mars and Broadchurch and Humans and Utopia, many things. And I think we added up at the end, it was something like 500 hours of television, which is a lot. And I was a bit horrified by that, but it was a lot. And then, but I really just fancied a change, and we'd sold the company a couple of times, or it had been sold. And the industry, as Frank was saying earlier, the industry in Britain is flourishing, the television industry, and it's a growing business, and it's a genuine business. It really is making a lot of money through creative excellence, and in Britain we're very, very good at that. We are the best storytellers in the world, I think, through our cultural heritage over, centuries really, and that really goes a long way. And we've, in the past, had a bit of a chip on our shoulder that American TV is better. Some American TV is wonderful. A lot of it is really as you will know. It really is, isn't it? A lot of it's really terrible. We get to see the really good stuff, but there's a huge amount of terrible shit going on. And we also get to make some amazing stuff here. I've got off sidetracked from the Kudos question, but anyway. But Kudos, I'd been doing that for a long time. The company was 40 permanent staff and about sort of 2,500 freelancers, so it was a big business by then. And I just thought it was time for a change. I was really flat out and needed to do something different. And also, I thought that the time in the industry, the opportunities that were out there to be an independent player and to be able to go to and work with the Netflix and Amazon and Apple and all of those places was really fun. And I thought if I was independent again, not owned by anybody, and an entrepreneur in that way, a creative entrepreneur, I would just have more fun doing it. So it was sort of starting small. It's now suddenly got really big again, and I'm anyway. But so that was really why, and I called it Sister because actually I had the first name. Well, I can't tell you what the actual first name was because that was a really rude name that my daughter, who's 6, came up with. But it was quite rude. She accidentally came up with a rude name. She didn't know what it meant. But anyway, that we nearly called it Giddy Aunt, the company. Terrible, isn't it? Yeah. And my team were like, you can't call it that, that's a terrible name. And then we came up with Sister, which was about openness and collaboration. And the fun in that for me is it's independent, so we can work with anybody, anywhere in the world. And I can be as fussy and choosy about the projects I take on. I don't really care about the bottom line. I believe entirely in creative ambition and success. You will create a successful business. So I never really worry about the money, ever. And I've been, so far, that's really worked. If you make it great, people will come. And if you put the creative integrity of the project at the heart of every choice, you end up more likely to make great work, and great work leads to success. So that's been a very clear strategy. And we put writers at the heart, the voices, the storytellers at the heart of the business. So, yeah.
I think it'd be interesting to know a little bit more about how you make those judgments, because an awful lot of projects must cross your desk. So what do you look for when you're deciding whether to work on a project?
Projects do cross my desk, but mostly they come from conversations. A lot of projects cross my desk. 99 times out of 100, I won't be interested in them, if I'm being honest, because usually I will want to work with the writers who I think are brilliant, and that's often new talent as well. But usually those brilliant new talents come in with a baby idea, a germ of something. Very rarely does any great talent come in with a finished piece. I mean, I rarely get sent scripts that I think are special. Most of the time it's an idea, and I see a talent in the writer, and then it's a collaborative process to work together to take that idea. So with Hustle, for example, and with Humans, actually, with a lot of them, it's a combination of a writer and a producer and a director, and you develop the idea for a year and a half together, and you collaborate on it. But in terms of the things that interest me, it's easy to say the things that don't, in a way, because the things that do interest you, you don't really know yet, because it's normally the fresh things, something you haven't seen before. So it's the things that you go, that's a great 2-line idea, I haven't been told that story before, or I haven't seen characters like that, or that world is new and that's interesting to me. Things that I'm not interested in are shows that copy other things that have gone before. So if someone came in and said, it's a bit like Broadchurch, I'd be like, you know. And there's a lot of that happens in our business. Somebody sees success, and so you often get pitched things that are like the thing you've just made, and it's like, I've just made that, and I don't want to make it again. So things like that, never. Period shows, I'm not really interested in, but people love watching them, and that's fine. I just don't want to make them. So they have to be, you know, intriguing, ambitious, different, but really it's about the writer. Because if somebody can pitch you an idea, from one writer you'd go, yawn, that's terrible. And then from a writer like Abby Morgan or Paul Abbott, you'd just say, well, in their hands, that 2-line idea would be special. So it's really about the writer. Right. Always. It's always about the writer.
And it's clear that a lot of the decisions have been very, very right. And you can see that in the success of the program. So you know, many of the programs you've worked on are critically acclaimed and popular, which you don't always get at the same time.
Not
Spooks, Life on Mars, Humans, Broadchurch. I'd be interested to know about a program that you've worked on that didn't get the attention it deserved, and what you take away from experiences like that.
Well, I'd never say it didn't get the attention it deserved, because if it didn't get the attention, it probably didn't deserve it. Maybe, I don't know. I think the audience is pretty much always right, in my experience. They judge things very instinctively and very naturally. A couple of shows that I felt maybe, I think I suppose part of it is what one considers success, you know, what the criteria are for success. And we use the ratings system, and I don't know what industries you all work in, but at 9:36 on the dot every morning, the overnight ratings come into our inbox in an email, and it tells you how many people watched your show, and that's done that, you know, the bulb, the little thing, which there are only 5,000 people in the country who are individually representative of many thousands. So it's a preposterous system, really, particularly given technology these days. It should be much more sophisticated than that, but that is still the system that's used. 5,000 people choose when, you know. And so we're obsessed with this criteria. And so something that maybe gets 1 million people, like Utopia, was not an audience hit, and it didn't get massive viewing figures, but critically and with the audience that it found, it became a real fan favourite. And the audience who found it loved it, so they would probably have given it a score out of 100 of 95, but only a smaller number of them watched it. And that was frustrating to me, because I loved the show. But then some things you work on where 9 million people might watch it, but they might only love it at 65%. So it's in a world where you can provide niche content now on Netflix and Amazon and all those things, is it more fun? Does it matter? And actually, if you get enough people who love it and it's their passion, is that okay? So Utopia was one definitely where we felt like that was slightly lost in the world. But then I keep meeting people who tell me it's the favourite thing we've ever made. So I don't know.
We have a couple of clips, including one of Utopia, so maybe now is a good time to show that. Do you want to say anything to set it up? Normally I would say it's self-explanatory, it's like a trailer, but Utopia, you might actually want to say a few words about.
I don't know, how many people have seen Utopia? Many people have seen it? Some of you have seen it. So Utopia was a Channel 4 series by an amazing writer called Dennis Kelly, in a sort of, it's present day, but in a slightly unusual present, and it was about a network of people who believed that the end of the world was coming because we're overpopulated, which is true, and we really are. Our population, as we know, has grown in the last...
And the end of the world is coming.
We are, and the end of the world is coming. I think our population's doubled in the last 30 years or something. I mean, it's pretty staggering, the statistics, globally. So this unit wanted to create a vaccine around the whole world, which people thought was an anti-flu vaccine or an anti-malaria vaccine, which would in fact sterilise 1 in 10 people, so that gradually the population of the world was reduced. But really, it's about responsibility, and it's very dark and very violent and very funny and very unusual.
So essentially just your sunny family sitcom. So Utopia did attract an audience internationally, and I know you won an international Emmy for it. How important is it that British programs get picked up for broadcast beyond the UK, and does that mean that programs have to lose a certain Britishness to have broad appeal?
That's a very big question, which is very, it's changing so rapidly because, and I try not to get too, you will know that the program, the platforms that we call the SVODs, which are the subscription video on demand, which are Netflix and Amazon and those things, and Apple and YouTube, are all now competing for global content. And there was a feeling and a concern that British content like this, or Happy Valley, or any of those things, would struggle around the world. But in fact, the opposite has been true. And the more specificity something has, and the more authentic it is, therefore, because it's more truthful and more real, the more successful it is, and the more likely it is to be able to succeed. So Broadchurch has sold to, I think, 165 countries or something. Utopia actually hasn't sold to that many, partly because it is quite violent and quite dark, and it's very black comedy, and it's for a younger audience generally, and there aren't as many channels that do that. So in a way, the more authentic something is creatively, the more it has a voice at the heart of it, the more likely it is to succeed around the world, like any good piece of culture or art, actually. If you try and design something that's going to have global appeal, it's going to feel like it's a bit of a pudding. We call them a Euro pudding, which is, when you kind of say, oh, well, we need a French actor who's come to England from this, and we need to try and get the funding together. But in fact, the audiences are so canny that they know when something. So Happy Valley, which is set around the corner, is authentic to that place, and the cast are real, and it feels very grounded, and that's much more likely to succeed. But what has happened is that with Netflix and those other players coming into the market, they've got loads more money. So they've put loads more money into the budgets of shows that we're making. They used to be made for £1 million an hour, approximately. Still a lot of money, but when you those shows employ sort of 250 people per show and those things. So it's not that much over 9 months or a year. And they used to cost that, and now the average cost, I think, is about 2.8 million, and that's happened in 3 years, which is rapid. And is good in some senses, because there's quality on screen and you have more money and more time to make the thing. But at the same time, it's inflated rates, so it's still a really good business to get into, by the way. People pay really well for good people. They really do. But it has meant that the expectations have risen, much like the students here, I think, we were talking about this earlier. They expect more, and so you end up then going after bigger stars and bigger named actors because they're paying more. So something becomes more global. So it's sort of a bit of a vicious circle. And actually, in the middle of that, as a producer, my job is to try and hold on to the creative heart of the thing that we're making, and to not let it be so impacted by the budget or the expectations that it loses its sense of itself and therefore doesn't achieve anything. So if I'd make things for a British audience, that's what I think about, really. And if they're going to like it, there's a good chance that the rest of the world will like it too. But it's really rapidly changing. As I say, it's becoming such a commercial sector now. It really is. And who knows, we haven't got to the end of that yet.
So Broadchurch is an obvious example of a program that worked for British audiences, but also far beyond. That's the other clip that we have, is the season 3 trailer, which maybe we'll show now. Do you want to set that one up?
I don't know, how many of you saw
people have all seen
Broadchurch?
Broadchurch here?
So most of you have seen it, apart from Dominic hasn't seen it, which is terrible.
Shameful.
And my parents, so this is a true story. So my mum and dad, it's not that you expect your parents to watch everything you make, but it has won kind of like 5 BAFTAs and shit. And I went round there about 3 months ago, when actually when the 3rd series was coming on. I said, oh, Mum, Dad, the new series is coming on soon, so will you watch it? It's on a Monday. And she said, oh, darling, yes, we will. We actually haven't got round to watching the first 2 yet. So I said, what do you mean you haven't got round to watching them? I sent you the DVDs. She said, oh, yes, they're there, look, we haven't. So it turned out they hadn't watched it at all, and they still haven't. But they watch TV all day, so I'm like, what are you actually doing? Literally, they haven't watched it. Anyway, it's very good for me, it's very grounding. They still haven't seen it. Anyway, it's fine. This is a clip, this is a trailer for Series 3 where the brilliant Julie Hesmondhalgh played a rape victim, and Olivia Colman and David Tennant took her through the process of what that means when you come forward, and it dealt with, across the 8 hours, how a victim is dealt with in that situation, and how the community came under scrutiny for that assault.
For a lot of people, although obviously not your parents, Broadchurch represents a kind of rare instance of water-cooler television at a time when most viewers don't sit down and watch the same program at the same time. I'd be curious to know what it is about Broadchurch that did get people to sit down at the same time and talk about it later.
Well, it's interesting because the live viewing, as we call that, is back in fashion. And Broadchurch was one of the things that definitely drove that. But this year, I mean, Happy Valley was a big live viewing experience, and not just in drama, but, you know, Liar this year and Dr. Foster and Strictly Come Dancing, which I love. The Bake Off, I love all those shows. The British Bake Off, you know, all of those things. Live viewing is actually back in fashion. And I think with Broadchurch, what was sort of we weren't expecting it because things were in a bit of a decline at that time when it came out. So you never know. But I think I always had a bit of a theory that the whodunit, there's no question a whodunit when you have a range of suspects that you know, that just the simple plot thing of you want to know who did it keeps you coming back. But I don't think that was the reason, because I think that's a sort of, that enabled the audience the next day at work to say, oh, who do you think did it? So it allowed a conversation to happen. But I really feel what was special about Broadchurch, which was the writer, which was an amazing thing that Chris did, it was so emotional and so funny and so real that it was the emotion that you watched it for, because it made you cry and it made you feel something deeply. You felt deep grief for Beth in the first series when she lost her son, and in this series for Julie, you empathise with her so much. And I think people, you know, if culture is to do anything, it's to challenge and it's to make you feel. And television's job for me is to make you feel something, definitely, and to make you think, but it will only make you think if you feel something. So I think, and Broadchurch, the landscape as well, I think, was extraordinary, and it felt like a treat to be there. And we always talked about a terrible thing in a beautiful place, and we really worked hard on making it feel beautiful and making that contrast part of the storytelling. So I think all of those things combined, and probably above all, the casting makes a huge difference. You have a great script which attracts great actors, and then we approached Olivia first, and when she wasn't well known at that time on British television, she'd done Peep Show on Channel 4, but when she said she wanted to do it, immediately it opened up other thoughts for us about who could play Hardy. And we just got lucky, they'd never met before. But David Tennant and Olivia Colman hit it off and are now best friends. And that relationship they have on screen, I mean, he's not curmudgeonly like that, he's delightful. But that kind of constant is so appealing, isn't it? Because you feel so comfortable with them and you trust them and you like them, but they're not perfect. They're flawed and real, and so, yeah. And it's just an alchemy, honestly. You just get lucky sometimes that the bits come together.
You've talked a bit about some of the changes that you've seen happen in the television industry. Can you give us, I know we could probably spend another hour talking about this, but a sort of sense of some of the broad changes that you've experienced in your time working in TV? And maybe also give us a sense of where you see the television industry moving in the future?
That's easy, isn't it? That's a nice, easy question.
In 2 minutes or less.
Yeah, how long have we got? Well, I mean, you know, we alluded to it earlier with Netflix, and how many of you watch programs on Netflix now? Most. You don't watch anything, do you? Keep doing this with this. No, a little bit. Why are you here, sir? Why are you here? No. But many do now. My children actually call it, they don't say, can we watch television? They say, can we watch Netflix? They don't even know what TV is. They call it, can we watch Netflix? So that has had a huge difference. Money, the number of things that are commissioned. The BBC and ITV are co-producing, which means they're putting in a portion of the budget, and then those other players I've mentioned are putting in the other part of the budget, which has had an effect on needing stars and things for stuff. But I think what is going to happen, that in a way is more pertinent really, is that those players will consolidate and will have, they're called the FANGs, which is Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. And the acronym is FANG. And they will consolidate even further, and they'll buy up all the little streaming platforms, and it will all be one big streaming service within 10 years. And, you know, in the way that Facebook and Google have a monopoly on pretty much everything, the same will happen in streaming, which is why we have to protect the BBC. So if there's any BBC haters in the room, please rethink, because it's so crucial that independence that it gives that organisation and the investment it gives to new talent around the country and not just in London as well is absolutely crucial. But I think commercial TV, linear TV is going to disappear and it will all be streamed and non-scheduled within 10 years.
Although you can imagine that there will always be, some gems that shine through, like Broadchurch, where people want to.
Well, that's the thing.
Watch it in a traditional style.
Completely. And I when I say disappear, I don't mean that those things will, because I think you're completely right. And I think the audience's appetite for those shared conversations is massive, and only at their peril will people ignore that. But there will be so much choice. And you have to hope that the quality will win, and that always is generally what happens. The audience decide and choose, and they choose the best things. But we like having shared conversations, don't we? I love watching things live and going out on a Sunday night. I've been watching Gunpowder recently, and I loved watching that on a Saturday, and enjoying, it's on at 9 o'clock or 9:05, sitting down to watch it. I could watch it on catch-up easily, but I like thinking that everywhere around the country other people are watching it. So I think there will be both, but it's going to be harder for those to punch through, definitely.
The issue of diversity in the television industry is a topic that's received a lot of media attention recently. What are your views on the challenges around diversity in the industry?
We're hopeless at it. We're really, really terrible. And there are so many well-meaning schemes and people who want to be better. For so many, it's like as with diversity in any industry, it's important not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's representing your population will encourage more people to watch your shows. So it's so bloody obvious in many ways, but we struggle to get enough people from diverse and from all kinds of, and by diversity, out of London, is a problem in itself in television. And we were talking a bit about this earlier. One of the big challenges is that they're low-paid jobs, and the bottom rungs of TV, as they are with many things, but they're low-paid. And if London is the centre of those, it's very hard for people who don't have some financial support. And if you come out of university now with debt, to then earn minimum wage for 2 or 3 years while you work your way up is tough when you're living in central London. So it's a real challenge, and everyone's trying to grapple with it. It's getting a bit better. I think representation on screen is better. I think you'd all agree probably that's improving. But still, we're not doing enough, and we just need to keep at it. And for example, and also in terms of women, who I don't consider to be a minority, because they're not, but in terms of directors in television, there's some appalling statistics. I think it's something like, you would know probably, I think it's something like sort of 85% of directors in television and film are men. 85% or 90%. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I suppose
shocking.
Part of the problem is that issues of diversity often get reduced to what's most visible to us, so what's on screen, and that is changing. But for there to be a significant and lasting change, it needs to happen at all levels. So, I know that, for example, you're a big supporter of new talent. So what can executive producers, people in your position, do to enable new talent to have opportunities?
We have to invest in it and give new talent time, because what we're doing a bit now, that the industry's growing so much that we're going, right, who's a new talent? And everyone wants them, and suddenly they're elevated to a position of where we expect so much from what they can achieve, and they've only been writing for 2 or 3 years or something, and they can't possibly deliver what we need them to at that time scale. But we're required, and we want to, so everyone's after, particularly the BAME writers, everyone's really after that talent, which is great because they're getting more opportunity, but at the same time we must be careful we don't crush people in that process and in that run and scram for talent. So we have to, what I'm trying to do is to build in time and pay people a salary where they can write and not have an output required. We were talking about this earlier, where you just say, just write for a bit and we'll support you financially for a year or 6 months. We might do every 6 months, and it gives more people a chance, but nothing's expected from that. So it just means you've got enough money to live on, write and learn from us. And I think we have to do more of that. Our R&D is weak in television. We don't have the time to do it properly, and we need to get much better at it. And I'm also asking, I've been recently being quite vocal about trying to get the FANGs, who we referred to earlier, to invest in, to understand that our talent in this country in television comes from the theatre, which is subsidised, and it comes from public service broadcasting, which is subsidised, and that we need to keep refilling the well if we're going to keep stealing from it. We need to keep replenishing the talent at that early stage. So,
I know we have some students and recent graduates here who may be interested in a career in television. So maybe we can end this part of the evening with advice that you might give to students or graduates.
It's great. It's a fantastic business. I absolutely love it. And everyone I work with loves it. Every day is different. You get to see so many extraordinary people, places. I mean, what better job is there than thinking of an idea that can entertain people and spending 2 or 3 years trying to do that? And it's full of problems. It's an endless troubleshooting job. It's constantly, that's what it is. It's constantly problem solving, but I love that. So do it is the first thing. We employ at the moment about 1,600 people, probably across all the productions, maybe fewer than that, but a lot. And those jobs range from behind the camera, you know, from producer to writer to runner to makeup designer, costume designer, grip, the person who moves the thing that the camera sits on along the track, and that's called a dolly, and then the person who pushes it is called a grip. Gaffers, who are the electricians who put the lights up to be filmed, to the location manager who goes out and takes photos of all the locations and tries to persuade people to let us trash their homes for a few weeks. Never let a location company into your house, by the way, ever. Doesn't matter how much money they're offering you, your home will not look the same again afterwards, unless you want a refit, in which case get them to do it. So it's amazing, but I suppose you need tenacity. You need to be prepared to work really hard. Everybody works really hard, but the hours are long. You know, a filming day starts at 6:30 in the morning, and you have to be there at 6:30, 7 o'clock on set, and it finishes at 7:30 at night, and then you clear up and you get home about 9 every day. So that's what it is. It's just that every day. And it's wonderful, but it's bloody hard work. And so I always say, if you don't love it, don't try and do it. If you really love that camaraderie and the feeling of making something that people are going to watch and talk about, then do it. But if you can, try and be tenacious, write to people endlessly, go and see people. Try and get in with the junior people in the company in a way, because if you go for the senior people, they're too busy to take you seriously because they haven't got time. So you need to try and find the rung underneath who's going to get time to have a meeting with, who can then say to me, I've met this person, they're really great. And then be really, really pushy about, and charming and pushy, but you know, don't sit back and be quiet. You have to get out there, which is difficult if you're not earning any money. It's really, really tough. But it's also, you know, there's a lot of work, so there is appetite for people, good people.
Great. Thank you all for attending. There are drinks outside, but before you run off for a drink, could we just also thank Jane for coming here?
Thank you.